Chapter 1. "Why can't I find decent help?" Ellie muttered aloud to the empty car. She knew she was being harsh. Marcy was a whiz in the kitchen, and she was fantastic with the customers, when she showed up for work. She just didn't have quite the same work ethic as Ellie. Marcy knew Ellie really needed to take a day off. She'd been planning it for weeks, even though it was mostly just a mental health day to get some shopping and things other than baking done. Marcy had promised to cover, but she had called at 3:30 this morning to tell Ellie that her stomach was upset so she wouldn't be able to make it in. So much for sleeping in just once, Ellie shook her head. Now she was on her way to the bakery to get the early morning pastries going. It was only 4:15 a.m., but she was already behind schedule, especially since she wouldn't have any help today. Ellie wished she could be as carefree and relaxed as Marcy, but owning Snickerdoodle Bakery forced her to be more responsible than that. The business didn't run itself. As much as Ellie would like to spend all of her time in the kitchen dreaming up new recipes to experiment with, she ended up spending much of her time paying bills, doing maintenance on the equipment, meeting with accountants, scrubbing dishes, and all the other non-glamorous tasks a business owner covers to control expenses. Opening the tiny bakery had been Ellie's dream since childhood. In fact, she had the colorful crayon drawing of the storefront hanging in her office that she had made when she was a starry-eyed 8-year-old. It proudly proclaimed the name she had chosen back then, and which she had kept the same when she cut the ribbon for the bakery many years later. The sign guy had thought she was mildly insane when she gave him that child's drawing to explain the design for the bakery's sign. The results turned out rather fabulous, if she did say so herself. Once she decided on a goal or dream, she never let it go until it came true. This stubborn, optimistic streak had worked out pretty well for her so far. Now, if she could just meet Prince Charming and have him sweep her off her feet, life would be absolutely grand. Of course, she wouldn't just be a princess who sat by his side and looked pretty. She would have charitable causes, and he would seek her counsel before making any important decisions. They would be equal partners, laughing and challenging each other as they ruled the kingdom as an unstoppable team who always prioritized the well-being of their people. Yeah, right. She shook her head at that silly fantasy. Might be time to let that fairy tale go. She chastised herself as she searched for her jingling cell phone. She knew it would be Marcy calling to apologize for letting her down. She really couldn't get angry with Marcy for bailing on her. She probably really was sick. It was hard not to be a tiny bit jealous, though. Ellie would have to practically be on her deathbed to not come to work when she was scheduled. It was just ingrained in her personality, and would probably be the exact same way if she worked for someone else, rather than owning her own small business. It just wasn't in her to slack off. The phone kept ringing insistently as she dug around in her purse, which she had plopped in the passenger seat of her vintage yellow Volkswagen Beetle. Her mechanic kept telling her the car was well beyond its prime, but he was always able to get it running again, and she wouldn't consider selling it. She had baked and sold fresh fruit pies the entire summer before she turned 16 in order to save the money to buy it. It was more than a car to her. It represented her path to independence and the ability for the baking she loved so much to become a legitimate way to make a living. People were willing to pay for the baked goods she made. The idea still made her smile. After being silent for a moment, the phone began ringing again. Marcy had probably refused to leave a voicemail, instead opting to call back until she picked up. "I don't know where my phone is, Marcy," Ellie told the empty car as she searched for the blaring device. A glowing light between the passenger seat and console caught her eye. Her phone must have fallen out of her open purse and slid down the crack beside the seat. Leaning to the right, she eased her hand into the narrow opening and tried to grab the device. It was in farther than she anticipated. Glancing down, she tipped further to the right, her fingers straining to reach the phone. The loud thud startled her. Heart racing frantically, she slammed on her brakes and pulled to the side of the road, certain that she had just hit something. Her frazzled brain tried to figure out what it could have been. Whatever it was had been big. It had sounded big enough to be a deer, or maybe a very large dog. Tears pooled in her eyes as she realized she had probably killed the poor creature. Chastising herself for being so careless and wondering what she should do, she sat there, stunned. The problematic phone was now silent, but she still couldn't quite reach it. Not knowing what else to do, she took a deep breath before emerging from the car to go see what she had hit. Chapter 2. It was difficult to see what the crumpled heap was by the glow of her taillights. Ellie rushed over, the idea that an injured animal might hurt her quickly fleeting with the knowledge that she had caused the injury and needed to help if she could. As she jogged toward the dark lump, a wave of panicked nausea swept over her. Not having time to vomit, she forced herself to keep moving forward and face what she had done. The animal that she had hit wasn't an animal at all. It was a man. Ellie's hands shook as she tried to figure out how to revive him. She patted his face, yelling, "Sir! Sir! Oh, please don't be dead, sir!" Relief flooded her system when she leaned down and heard ragged breaths coming from him. "Thank God!" She sagged with relief before adding, "You will not die on my watch." Frantically trying to think of what to do, Ellie realized she needed to call 911 for emergency assistance. Her phone was buried beside the seat in her car. The jogger surely had his cell phone with him, right? Tapping the pockets of his zippered jacket, she didn't feel anything. Looking down at his dark pants, she wondered if it might be lurking down there. "Who wears black clothes to jog on the road this early in the morning?" she muttered as she forced her inhibitions down and dove her hands down into his pants pockets. Of course, he chose that moment to wake up. She froze with both hands down the front of the stranger's pants pockets when she heard him croak, "I don't know what you're looking for down there, but I sure hope you find it." Yanking her hands back as if she had been caught with them in the cookie jar, she said, "We need a cell phone." "Don't have mine with me," he mumbled, his eyes now closed again. She felt like chastising him for being out on the road without one, but considering she had just been driving distracted while she was searching for her phone and had proceeded to run over him, she opted to stay quiet. "We need to get you to the hospital." She said the words loudly because she wasn't sure how lucid he was. "Can you walk?" She already knew the answer, but that didn't stop her from hoping that his injuries were miraculously less than she feared. He gave such a slight nod, she wasn't positive that she hadn't imagined it. His eyes were still closed. Giving a longing look up and down the dark road, she prayed to see approaching headlights, but none appeared. Unsure how she was going to get him in her car, she decided to make it as easy as possible. "I'm going to back my car up so it's not so far for you," she told him, even though she wasn't sure he was awake. "Try not to run over me again," he whispered, his eyes still closed. Then he flashed a wide smile at her. His gleaming white teeth were visible in the red glow from her car's taillights. "I'll try not to," she promised before jogging to her car, shaking her head at how good-natured he was about being mowed down by her vehicle. Deciding he was probably just delirious from the pain, she whipped her car into reverse, but stopped well short of where he was. Running over him, then backing over him again, would be horrifying. Scurrying around her Beetle, she opened the passenger door, hoping to make it as easy as possible to get him in the car. When she returned to him, he appeared to be unconscious again. Shaking him gently, she said, "Sir, we need to get you into my car so I can drive you to the hospital." "Not sure I want to ride with you," he croaked before gracing her with another dashing smile to let her know he was teasing. How he could have a sense of humor at this moment was beyond her, but it helped diffuse the stressful situation. Besides, it was better than having him yell at her, which would probably come when he felt better and was able to fully process what had happened. It was obvious that he wouldn't be able to stand on his own, so she gingerly attempted to lift him to get her arm under him. He tried to help, but winced in pain. "Where does it hurt?" she asked him. His groaned response, "Everywhere," made her feel even worse. Not having time to wallow in guilt and concerned that things might get worse the longer he went without medical treatment, she summoned all of her strength and hefted him to a sitting position before pulling him up to his feet. He leaned heavily on her and held one foot up off the ground, but together they were able to hobble him towards the car. He was much bigger than she had originally thought. The supportive arm she had wrapped around his back was at his abdomen level. Her fingers curled around his side and discovered nice, tight abs. Knowing she shouldn't be noticing such things at this critical point in time, she snapped her attention back to the task at hand. Even though he was tipped to the side, allowing her to support much of his weight, she knew he was tall, at least 6 feet. They had almost made it to the car when he lost consciousness again. She had thought she was bearing most of his weight, but when he suddenly slumped down, she realized he had been doing much of the work. The force of his sudden drop caused her to lose her balance. More concerned about making sure that he didn't get hurt worse than her own safety, she cushioned his fall with her own body. In a fraction of a second, they were both on the ground. She was trapped, pinned under the unconscious, dead weight of the stranger. "Well, this is just great," she puffed out. Chapter 3. The urge to cry was almost overwhelming, but she refused to give in to it. She would let it all out once the stranger was safely at the hospital receiving treatment for his injuries, but right now, she needed to focus all of her energy on getting them out of this predicament. She couldn't help but notice that the weight of him on top of her wasn't entirely unpleasant, but she didn't have the luxury of time to be able to focus on that. As she was trying to decide if gently rolling him off her would risk injuring him further, she realized his breathing had hitched. She didn't have to wonder for long if he was awake. He shifted slightly, and she gasped in surprise when she felt the firmness in his pants pressing into her upper thigh. "At least that isn't broken," he mumbled near her ear, making the tiny hairs along the back of her neck stand at attention as a thrilling chill raced down her back. His apparently ever-present sense of humor helped to diffuse the impossibly awkward situation. She couldn't help but giggle at their predicament. He called her out on it by saying, "I'm glad you find it funny," but he started chuckling too. Coming up with a plan of action, he said, "I'm going to roll off you, trying not to break anything else in the process." She cringed at the word else, but he didn't seem to notice. "I don't think I can stand, but if you will help me sit up, we can both give a big heave and get me into the car seat." She wasn't at all sure about heaving him into the car, but she didn't want to take the time to retrieve her phone and call for help when they were this close. Besides, she was happy that he was awake and able to make a plan, instead of relying on her own wits, which always felt numbed during an emergency. With much grunting, groaning, and a couple of major heaves, they got him settled into the passenger side of the car. She ran around to the driver's side and squealed the tires, racing away to get him to help. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes as she drove. His breathing was heavy, as if the effort of getting from his horizontal position into the car's seat had really taxed his energy. There wasn't any traffic this early in the morning, so she drove a little faster than she would have under normal circumstances. If the police pulled her over, she could explain the situation and they would probably give her an escort to the hospital before promptly arresting her for reckless driving. She bit her lower lip, wondering if that were really a possibility. Would she go to jail for her careless moment this morning? Would the man sitting next to her sue her and cause her to lose the bakery she had spent her life building into a viable business? It didn't matter at this point. Her course was already set. She would just have to deal with whatever consequences arose from it. She glanced over at the dark-haired, handsome man sitting beside her and said a silent prayer that he wouldn't suffer any long-term injuries. The headlights at the stop sign up ahead indicated there was another car on the road. It was the first she had seen since leaving her home that morning. The other car was stopped, and she was on a main road that didn't have to stop, but something in her gut had her slowing down slightly. Sure enough, as she approached, the car pulled out directly in front of her. She slammed on her brakes, her hand automatically going out to brace the stranger from flying into the dash. He hadn't bothered with a seatbelt, so she did her best to become his safety guard. Hearing the tires squeal, her whole body tensed as she braced for impact. Chapter 4. Somehow, they managed to get stopped without hitting the other car. The Volkswagen stuttered with the effort of screeching to a halt. She could smell the scent of burning rubber emitting from the hot tires. The other driver went on, likely clueless to the mayhem that had almost ensued. Shaken, Ellie sat there for a moment to regain her composure before continuing on this treacherous drive. She looked over at the man beside her to make sure he was okay, or at least as okay as he could be, considering the morning they'd had. He filled up the seat and then some. In fact, the car felt somehow full with his presence. His knees were practically in the dash. He was still resting his head back with his eyes closed. Just when she was beginning to wonder if he had slept through the almost accident, he mumbled, "It was probably a woman driver." His words were so quiet, she almost wondered if he had actually uttered them. Eyes still closed, he began to chuckle at his own joke, confirming that he had made the insulting statement. Forgetting for a moment their precarious situation, Ellie batted at his shoulder with the back of her hand. His "ow" of surprise was quickly followed by, "That was the one place on my body that didn't already hurt." His words brought her back to the immediacy of the moment, so she slammed on the gas pedal and raced him to the emergency room. Once there, he was quickly swept away on a gurney, while she was left to wait and wonder. The triage nurse quickly discovered that she wasn't going to be much help when she couldn't even give her the man's name, so the woman moved on to her other duties, leaving Ellie wondering what to do next. Ellie had physically cringed when the nurse had called the man the victim. She supposed that is exactly what he was, her victim. Finding an orange pleather chair, she sat down in the waiting room. Pulling her blonde hair out of the bun she always wore at work, she ran her fingers through the long strands and tried not to stress too much about how her victim was doing. She wondered briefly what her regular customers would think about finding the bakery closed this morning, but there wasn't anything she could do about it. She considered taking a few minutes to go put a sign on the door, but she didn't want to take a chance on missing an update on the man's condition. After a few hours of waiting with no updates, she couldn't stand the suspense any longer. She doubted anyone would come to fill her in on his condition anyway, since she wasn't a family member, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. Wandering through the halls, she searched for any sign of the man. Not knowing his name was an inconvenience. Should she just ask someone the whereabouts of the man who looks like he was hit by a car? She peeked into several rooms, but it felt so invasive to look in at people when they were at their most vulnerable. A kind-faced nurse finally took pity on her. "What you looking for, hun?" "There's a man who was hit by a car," she started lamely, letting her words trail off at the end. "Oh, you mean Trey?" The woman's face perked up immediately, making Ellie feel irrationally jealous. "I'll go see if he's up for a visitor," the woman promised before her white rubber clogs squeaked away down the hallway. Unsure what to do other than follow her, Ellie wondered about her odd flare of envy at the nurse's familiarity with the stranger. Deciding that it shouldn't be surprising that his nurse was on a first-name basis with him, and the woman who put him here was not, she tried to tell herself she would just check on him and leave. When the nurse turned into a room and closed the door behind her, Ellie hovered awkwardly outside. She wasn't even sure if the woman had been heading directly to his room, but Ellie didn't know what to do other than wait. The nurse stayed in there for what seemed like an eternity, Just when Ellie was convincing herself that the nurse was evidently assisting someone else, she finally poked her head out of the door. "He'll see you now," she said to Ellie, gracing her with a friendly smile. Hands suddenly clammy, Ellie braced herself for what kind of condition he might be in. Her bracing didn't help because she was not prepared for what she saw inside his room. The man she had hit with her car was bandaged, battered, and bruised. One of his legs was elevated, and his head was wrapped in white gauze that extended down over one of his shoulders. He was holding his head with his hands and groaning in misery. She hated it that she had caused this much pain for him. Approaching his bedside, she told him sincerely, "I'm so sorry this happened." Doubting that he could hear her apology over his exaggerated moans of pain, she gingerly took his hand in hers to at least let him know she was there for him. He winced in pain at her gentle touch. That was the moment when he went too far. She began to wonder if he was toying with her. The hint of a smile that played at the corners of his mouth confirmed her suspicion. She dropped his hand as if it were a hot potato. "You're faking?" She screeched the words, shocked that he would go to such lengths to make her feel even worse. He was already unwrapping the extra gauze from his head. "No, I really got hit by a car today," he deadpanned. The nurse was chuckling at his antics as she left the room. "I can't believe you did that," Ellie pouted. "What happened is bad enough without making it worse." Taking her hand back in his own, he said, "I was just trying to lighten things up a little. It's so serious in here." Looking around, Ellie responded, "It is a hospital." "So that's what that smell is," he grinned. "Are you ever serious?" she asked him, returning his smile even though she was unable to believe his anger at her hadn't set in yet. "Almost all of the time," he answered, and for once his tone did sound serious. Her brows furrowed in confusion at his response, but she didn't ask him to expand. Since the light tone of the conversation had dissipated, she asked him what she really wanted to know. "How are you, really?" "I'm going to be around for a long time," he promised. Even though she knew he meant to assure her that he was going to be alive for a long time, a strange longing settled deep in her heart that he would say he planned to be around her a long time. The errant desire didn't make any sense. The last person he would want to be around was the woman who mowed him down with her car. "There is something we need to discuss, though." His deep voice sounded more somber than she had ever heard it in the short time she had known him. Nervous about what might be coming, she swallowed and nodded at him to continue. "It's about my hospital bills," he started, and the churning in her stomach began anew. Chapter 5. Ellie couldn't keep the panicked barrage of thoughts at bay. How long would he be in the hospital? This morning's stay had probably already burned through her meager savings. Would he sue her for damages? Was she going to lose her business over this? His demeanor had lulled her into believing he wasn't planning to press criminal charges against her, but she wasn't positive about that. Would she end up in jail to pay for her careless mistake? It was probably what she deserved for not being cautious enough behind the wheel, but that didn't mean it was what she wanted to happen. She would look horrendous in an orange jumpsuit. She knew it was selfish to worry about her own well-being when he was the one who was battered and bruised in a hospital bed, but she had worked so hard for everything she had, the thought of losing it all paralyzed her with fear. The worry must have been obvious on her face because he squeezed her hand in his own much larger one, as if to reassure her. She couldn't help but notice how soft his skin was, which then caused her to wonder what kind of moisturizer he used. Marveling that her mind could get so sidetracked at a critical moment like this, she focused her attention back to the injured man in front of her. Clearing her throat, she said, "About that. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything." Deciding her words sounded pathetically lacking, she added, "Of course." She had no idea how she would make it work, but she knew she couldn't expect the pedestrian she hit to pay his own medical bills. His face softened as he looked up at her. "That is exactly what I was going to say to you." Stunned by his chivalry, she openly gaped at him. "No!" She said the word adamantly. "It was my fault. I'll pay your expenses." "It wasn't completely your fault," he said, kindly attempting to let her off the hook. "I should have been wearing reflective clothing and paying more attention. It was just so early that I wasn't expecting any cars. Where were you headed at that early hour?" He seemed genuinely interested in her answer. His chocolate eyes sparkled as he listened to her talk about Snickerdoodle. She couldn't help but notice how handsome he would be, were it not for the cuts and already coloring bruises spread across his scruffy face. The fact that she had been the cause of those injuries made the guilt bubble up in her belly once more. "What happened just then?" he asked her. "Your face was glowing with excitement as you talked about your bakery, which sounds marvelous, by the way. Then your face fell like you lost your best friend." "I just feel so bad about what happened." Her face crumpled at the words and a sob escaped her throat as the reality of the morning finally began to set in on her. Like most men when faced with a crying woman, a panicked expression crossed his face. The uncertainty was short-lived. He scooted over to the far side of the bed and held his arms out to her. "What?" she asked him, trying to swipe the streaming tears from her face with the back of her hand. "Come here," he suggested. "No, I can't. I don't even know you," she stammered before adding, "I'm sorry for crying." "You had an incredibly stressful day, as did I." He lifted one raven eyebrow in her direction. "Now, come here." This time it was more of a demand than a suggestion. Ellie wasn't sure what came over her, but for some reason she complied with his request. Careful not to jostle him too much, she sat down stiffly on the edge of his hospital bed. Quick as a wink, his naturally dark-skinned arm reached around her middle and yanked her against him. As much as she knew this was completely inappropriate, it felt so marvelous to be held by him. She allowed her weight to sag back against him. One of his arms was wrapped around her, while his other hand caressed her long blonde hair, soothing her as she cried. The nurse who had helped Ellie earlier sauntered into the room. Her mouth formed an O of surprise when she discovered Ellie in bed with her patient. If she had been planning to chastise them, Trey's firm instructions changed her mind. "Could you hand me that box of tissues, please?" He indicated the box that was just out of reach. When the nurse complied, he added, "We would appreciate not being disturbed for a while. Thanks, Trina." The nurse nodded and shuffled out of the room as if his polite yet terse instructions made him the one in charge. Ellie tried not to bristle at the fact that he already knew the nurse's name. Once Trina's white shoes had squeaked out of the room, Trey pulled a few tissues from the box and gently dried Ellie's tears, which had stopped flowing. "Now then," Trey started, "I think since we are sharing a bed, that it is high time we learned each other's names." She started to balk at the insinuation he had made about them sharing a bed, but her mouth opened and immediately closed again, because he was right. "I'm Trey," he informed her. Not wanting to admit that Trina had already told her his name, she responded, "It's nice to meet you, Trey. I'm Ellie." Ellie. He let the name roll off his tongue, and she liked the way it sounded coming from his mouth. "It's perfect," he decided, and the compliment made her feel like she was glowing with warmth, even though she had nothing to do with the choice of her own name. "That expression, the one on your face right now, is the one that should always grace your beautiful face." He grinned down at her. She could feel her cheeks flaming hot when he continued, "I don't ever want to see that worried look in your eyes again. The concerned look that showed up when we were talking about my medical bills, so don't ever give those silly bills another thought. Got it?" His tone was light, but she sensed this was important to him. Well, it was important to her too. "No, I insist," she told him firmly. "You shouldn't have to pay a dime for becoming my car's hood ornament." "Hood ornament?" he yelled, but tickled her side to let her know he wasn't angry at the dig. She laughed as his fingers jiggled into her ribs. "Stop!" she yelled, still laughing. He stopped immediately, and their eyes locked onto each other. They were both breathing heavily, and when he leaned in, she sensed that he was going to kiss her. Not ready for that, she practically leaped out of the bed. "I should go," she informed him briskly as she retrieved her purse. He grinned up at her, flashing his pearly whites. "You'll be back to check on me, right?" His gaze was intent upon her as he waited for her answer. "Of course," she promised, then told herself that she must be crazy for thinking she saw a look of immense relief in his expression. The idea that this perfect specimen of manhood would care whether or not he ever saw her again was preposterous. He probably had women lined up waiting to take care of him while he was weak. Already rushing toward the door, she turned back to add, "Seriously, don't worry about the bills. I'll take care of it." As an afterthought, she added, "I mean, if you have health insurance you can use, that would be great. I'll pay for anything that isn't covered, though." "I have pretty good health insurance," he assured her. She tried not to let the immense relief show on her face, but was uncertain how successful she was. When she started toward the door again, his words made her pause. "There is one thing you could do for me," he hinted. Stopping herself from responding, "Anything?" she asked, "What would that be?" His twinkly eyes let her know he was up to something. "Well, I'm guessing the food in here is terrible," he started. She nodded, urging him to continue. "Sneak me in a cupcake? I love cupcakes. They are like little self-contained, single-serving-sized parties. You can make individual celebration treats and decorate each one how you want. They are truly the perfect dessert." Somehow, this handsome hunk of a man looked like a mischievous boy when he gushed about cupcakes. "What flavor?" she asked him. His response of, "Surprise me," made her shake her head and chuckle. "I'll see what I can do," she promised as she left his room. She passed Trey's nurse in the hallway. Trina's previously friendly expression had morphed into something much more catty. "Didn't take you long to dig your claws into him, did it?" The woman openly glared at Ellie. "Excuse me?" Ellie was stunned by the woman's cold tone. Lifting her shoulders, Trina went on. "Can't blame you, I suppose. Who would turn down a shot at bagging Trey Donovan, one of the richest, most handsome, eligible bachelors in the world?" "Trey Donovan?" Ellie asked, feeling numb. The name sounded vaguely familiar. The nurse simply rolled her eyes as if Ellie were the densest person on earth. "Google him," she said briskly before sauntering away. As soon as Ellie got back to her car, she used the end of her hairbrush to slide her phone out from where it was caught beside her seat. Google Images pulled up numerous, glamorous shots of Trey wearing tailored tuxedos with a parade of different gorgeous women at his side. Just when she was starting to think she might have met the perfect man, she discovered that he was one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the world. "Damn it!" she shouted, and pounded her fist on the steering wheel. Chapter 6. Ellie threw her extra energy into work. She had missed an entire day at the bakery while she waited at the hospital. It was impossible to know how much business she had lost. She had tried to go home that evening and relax, but her thoughts kept returning to the gorgeous billionaire she had plowed over with her bug. Unable to rest, she went to Snickerdoodle, deciding that she would make him the perfect cupcake, deliver it to him, and tell him to send her the bill for his hospital stay before leaving him and his hordes of beautiful groupies behind forever. It was really too bad that he was the infamous, womanizing billionaire. She had actually started to envision a future with the man she thought he was. The man he truly was would only be interested in a short-term fling, if that. It was tempting to accept the unspoken offer of a hot night or two of passion in his arms. After all, the man looked like a Greek god. He probably knew how to bring a woman to unspeakable degrees of pleasure. After spending the vast majority of the evening trying out different gourmet cupcake recipes, she went home to sleep for a few hours before returning to work at the butt crack of dawn. She couldn't help but grin at the phrase her father liked to use for the time she got up for work. When Marcy tasted the 5th batch of cupcakes Ellie had made the night before, she demanded, "What's up?" around a mouthful of red velvet. Unsure who else to discuss it with, the dam finally burst, and Ellie revealed the details of the stressful accident. "OMG! The Trey Donovan?" Marcy bugged her already large emerald eyes out at Ellie. "The one and only," Ellie confirmed before adding, "He seemed really nice, too. It's too bad he's a billionaire mogul." "Yeah, that's too bad," Marcy scoffed. At Ellie's nod, she nearly choked on her bite of cupcake. "Wait, you were serious?" "Yep, it's a deal breaker," Ellie stated matter-of-factly. I think you mean deal maker." Marcy was looking at her like she had grown an additional head. "It's Trey Donovan," Marcy added, as if Ellie was failing to comprehend the situation. "He could wear purple toenail polish and ask me to stand on my head while we fooled around, and I'd still be okay with it." Ellie couldn't help but chuckle at the visual of anyone convincing her fiery, red-haired employee to do anything she didn't want to. You might think that now, but the reality of being with such a powerful man would be dreadful. He is probably used to getting his way with everything. He would want to boss you around and always be in charge. Marcy seemed to ponder that, but then she shook her head. "I'm still okay with it. I'd go for it if I were you." "Well, that's not going to happen." Marcy deflated at Ellie's response, so she softened it. "I am going to take him a cupcake and check on him, though. I owe him that much." Marcy was already packing a cupcake into a single-serving box. The brightly hued polka dots on the white cardboard still made Ellie smile. How could anyone not be happy when looking at such a cheerful cupcake container? "You know, the best way to a man's heart is through his stomach," Marcy informed her as she handed the box to her. Turning back on her way out, Ellie asked, "What flavor did you decide on?" "Chocolate with peanut butter icing," Marcy answered before adding, "One taste of that, and he won't be able to keep his hands off you." Chuckling as the bells jingled on the door she had just opened, Ellie responded, "He's gonna have to." "At least try to keep an open mind. It's been a really long time since you've been with anyone," Marcy yelled as the door closed behind her boss. Chapter 7. Sitting in her canary yellow car in the parking lot of the hospital, Ellie gave herself a pep talk. In and out, check how he's doing, give him the cupcake, make a graceful exit. Easy peasy. Something told her it wouldn't be quite as easy as she hoped, but she silently vowed to have the strength not to fall for him any more than she already had. He was bad news, and she needed to steer clear in order to avoid taking the very real chance that he would break her heart. Would a billionaire break her heart into a billion pieces? She did not intend to find out. When she entered his room, her heart raced when she discovered his bed empty. Had he already checked out and gone back to his high-profile, wealthy lifestyle? A billionaire surely wouldn't stay in a lowly, small-town hospital very long, would he? He would probably prefer to have a private nurse, a cute one. Not wanting to think about that anymore, or the possibility that he had internal injuries that required him to move to a higher care-level room, she scurried back out to the nurse's station. Trina was not around, but the attractive woman behind the desk visibly perked up when Ellie mentioned Trey's name. The dreamy look that crossed the lady's face when Ellie inquired about Trey's whereabouts reconfirmed Ellie's decision to steer clear of the heartthrob. Walk in, give a polite inquiry about his health, deliver the cupcake, walk back out. Ellie repeated the mantra quietly to herself as she took the elevator to the floor the nurse had indicated Trey had been moved to. After awkwardly knocking on his door, Ellie tentatively peeked her head into his room. She didn't want to see anything she shouldn't, and it felt invasive to barge into a virtual stranger's hospital room. What she discovered inside the room shocked her. She hadn't realized the hospital even had rooms like this. It was like the penthouse suite of hospital rooms. Ellie gulped as she looked around at the big screen TV, the oversized bed, and was that a balcony? She tried not to worry about how much all of this was undoubtedly costing. She would have to figure out a way to pay for it. She just wished he wasn't living the high life in the hospital. Could the man not live like a regular person just for a couple of days? Her eyes paused on the ginormous bouquet of peach roses at his bedside table. There must have been at least 50 blooms, carefully arranged, but nearly bursting out of the large crystal vase. The card proudly proclaimed, "Wishing you only the best, XOXO, Selena." Ellie was dying to know who Selena was, but knew she didn't have any right to ask. Instead, swallowing her annoyance, she tried to give him a bright smile. He returned her grin before asking, "Are you my nurse?" "No. We met when my car... Well, I'm the reason..." She stammered as she searched for a way to describe running him over that wouldn't sound quite that horrible. Did he really not remember? Perhaps he had suffered a brain injury. It was then that she noticed the ornery gleam in his teddy bear eyes. Picking up one of the numerous pillows on his huge bed, she tossed it lightly at him. "You scared me," she reprimanded him. His eyes twinkled even more when he told her, "I could really use a sponge bath and would be much obliged if you were the one to give it to me." He moved aside the soft, blue, non-standard hospital-issue blanket in silent invitation to her. She took quick note of his sleek, black, luxurious pajamas. Apparently, billionaire skin is too sensitive to touch the green gowns that comprise regular hospital garb. "I'm sure there are plenty of qualified nurses here who would be happy to clean you," she finally responded to his suggestion. "But I want you to do it." He waggled his jet-black eyebrows before sticking his lower lip out in a full pout. She rolled her eyes, wondering if he was a bit of a spoiled diva. Like a dog spotting a squirrel, Trey's eyes darted to the bakery box she was still holding. "Is that for me?" His voice sounded as excited as a child on Christmas morning. She couldn't help but giggle at his enthusiasm as he actually clapped his hands in excitement over the sweet treat. Helping him get some of his many silk-covered pillows arranged behind his back so he could sit up, she followed his gaze to her light pink V-neck t-shirt, which was revealing some cleavage as she leaned over him. Straightening quickly, she fidgeted with her shirt as he continued to stare in the general direction of her breasts. Feeling awkward, she crossed her arms over her chest, the cupcake box still clutched in one hand. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed before his dark eyes finally traveled up to meet hers. Clearing his throat, he said, "I'm sorry. I'm worse than a horny teenager." She wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she remained quiet. Not seeming to notice how incredibly awkward she felt, he went on, "You're just so beautiful." She tried her best to see through his facade, but he seemed so sincere. Refusing to fall for his slick talk, she said, "Oh, you're good." "Why, thank you," he responded cockily, before adding, "But I haven't done anything to you, yet." The yet had her licking her lips involuntarily. She didn't want her body to react to him this way. He watched her like she was the only woman he had ever seen. It was embarrassing and thrilling, and more exciting than any look she had ever been given. Not wanting to let him get to her, she decided to shut things down quickly. "I know your type," she informed him before adding, "and I'm not falling for your charm." She wasn't willing to become one in a string of many women that he charmed out of her pants before quickly moving on. "Is that so?" He quirked a brow at her, obviously amused. At her brisk nod, he asked, "And what exactly do you think my type is?" "The rich playboy who is used to getting everything he wants and having everyone fawn all over him," she retorted, feeling pretty good about herself until she saw him visibly slump in the bed. "You know who I am," he guessed. "I do, and I want no part of it," she responded. "I know what you powerful guys like, and that lifestyle is not for me." "Are you going to fill me in on what it is you think I enjoy?" He seemed bemused by her brashness, but she fell in too deep to stop now. "You know, the bossy, I'm in charge stuff." She knew she should quit before she got herself in any deeper, but her mouth wouldn't cooperate. "You super wealthy men want to be with obedient women who will do whatever you say and like it." "Is that right?" He grinned up at her, like she was the most amusing person he had ever encountered. "What else am I looking for in a woman?" "You probably always want to be dominant. You're used to controlling everything and having everything go your way in business dealings, so that probably carries over into your romantic life," she guessed. "It's starting to sound like you think I would be a selfish pig in the bedroom." When she lifted her shoulders as if to say, "If the shoe fits," his eyes lit up with an idea. "I think I should get the opportunity to prove otherwise." He patted the bed beside him in silent invitation. She scoffed and shook her head at his outlandish suggestion. Continuing to plead his case, he added, "It sounds like you've been getting your ideas of billionaire sexy time skills solely from 50 Shades of Grey." She shook her head, even though she knew his assessment was spot on. He gave her a look to let her know he was aware that his guess was accurate, but didn't call her out on it. "On behalf of all of the other poor billionaires out there, I would like the chance to prove that we aren't all control freaks. In fact, I pride myself on being a generous, giving lover." She could feel her heart rate quickening at the thought of him giving her pleasure over and over again. She focused on deepening her breaths, which had become unnaturally shallow. As she worked to calm the outward signs of her arousal, something he said finally dawned on her. "Poor billionaires?" she asked him. "That's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it?" "Not at all," he responded immediately. "Very wealthy people can buy anything they want," he started. "Right," she interrupted as if he had just made her point. "But," he held up a finger to let her know he wasn't finished, "we are often broke in the assets that truly matter. Love, companionship, affection, time, intimacy, emotional attachment. All the money in the world can't buy those things." She hadn't ever really thought about it that way. It would be tough to never really know who liked you for you rather than your money. She was sure there were plenty of users out there who would be more than willing to take advantage of Trey's money. She could see the potential for it to be a lonely existence. In the big scheme of things, too much money would be a decent problem to have, so she didn't want to let him feel too sorry for himself. Sticking out her plump lip, she said, "Poor billionaires have it so rough." He guffawed with laughter at her silly response. "It's really awful," he joked with her. "We have even formed a support group. It's called the Broke Billionaires Club." "So sad," she feigned sympathy. "You common folk just don't understand the woes of having more money than you know what to do with," he said as he swooped a strong arm out and pulled her into his bed. "Yeah, that's a problem I've never had to deal with," she admitted, enjoying the feeling of being cradled once more in his arms. "I can't tear my eyes away from that cupcake container," he rumbled near her ear. "Hand it over," he joked, when she lifted it up just out of his reach. "You're worse than a kid," she reprimanded him, even though she secretly enjoyed having him so excited about tasting one of her baked goods. She hoped he would like it. He stretched and grabbed the box from her hand and tore into it. If the groaning noises he was emitting were any indication, he was a huge fan of her cupcake. "This is so delicious," he raved around a mouthful of the treat, making her beam. He scarfed down the entire thing and was licking off his fingers when he commented, "That has to be one of the best cupcakes I've ever had, and I'm a bit of a cupcake snob." "Really?" She wanted him to go on. "It had just the right amount of frosting, and the cake practically melted in my mouth." She liked having him brag on her baking skills. I bet your bakery is the hottest spot in town, he guessed. Well, she didn't want to admit to him that her business was barely scraping by. She finally settled on, "It pays the bills." "If I lived here, I would be there every day," he praised her. "It's so much better than the horrid hospital food they serve here. Even the premium meals leave a lot to be desired," he revealed. She tried not to flinch at how much the premium meals must cost. She wanted to tell him that she would appreciate him holding down the costs of his hospital stay as much as possible, but she doubted he would have any idea how to go about doing that. Super wealthy people didn't understand the daily struggle that money could be for the average person, but she refused to let him pay for an accident that had been her fault. No matter how wealthy he was, she had more pride than that. Broaching the subject another way, she asked, "When will you be able to get out of here?" "My doctor said I'm a little banged up and I'll probably be sore for a few days, but nothing is broken, so they are planning to release me today." He smiled, totally proud of himself. His use of the plural word doctors was concerning, but she tried not to let it show. The financial implications of him being able to leave today were a huge relief, but her heart weighed heavily in her stomach at the thought of him leaving town today. It was probably best for him to go before she became any more attached, though. Chapter 8. Reaching over to the plethora of electronic devices that were at his bedside, Trey grabbed one and announced, "I have an idea." Ellie wondered how all of his belongings had arrived there, but decided not to ask. He probably had people who took care of such mundane tasks for him. He used the Wi-Fi to download an ebook on his Kindle app, while Ellie tried not to wonder how much the hospital's Wi-Fi cost per day. "There." He handed the tablet to her. "Since you seem to like it so much, you can read 50 Shades of Grey to me. Just the dirty parts, though." "I'm not reading this to you," she spluttered, shocked by his suggestion. "Come on," he tried. "I'll let you have your way with me. You can be in charge of the Billionaire," he offered, resting back against his pillows and indicating with an open hand that she was free to climb on. "You are in the hospital recuperating," she reminded him. "I'll be released later," he promised. "Want to have your way with me then?" "No," she lied, hoping that she sounded convincing. "Can I have a get-well kiss?" he asked, trying to look innocent. She started to say no, but then decided to go for it. He seemed surprised at first that his wish had been granted when her lips brushed lightly against his. It didn't take him long to recover and join in the kiss. He kept his lips soft and pliable as they explored each other's mouths. When she opened her mouth to let a sigh escape, his tongue took the opportunity to delve inside. She felt it all the way to her toes as his tongue danced with hers. Deciding she had to get out of there before things got out of hand, she pulled back. "I have to get back to work," she said over her shoulder, already headed for the door. "Make me something marvelous," he requested. She told him she would see what she could do before letting the door close behind her. Leaning back on it, she let out a huff of breath. She would need to keep her guard up to protect her heart when she was around that infuriating, funny, and sexy-as-hell man. Marcy had held down the fort at the shop for the mid-morning crowd, so Ellie let her go home early. The woman liked nothing more than a surprise afternoon off. Apparently, money wasn't as important to her as free time. Ellie tried to tell herself that she was giving the woman a reward, not trying to save a few bucks to help her pay the ever-mounting medical bill of the man that wouldn't leave her mind for more than a moment. She started whipping up fresh batches of some of her favorite cupcake recipes. She pretended it was for the shop, but she knew it was really in hopes that she would get to see Trey enjoy one of her sweet treats one more time. The bells on the bakery's front door jingled just as she was pulling a steaming batch of salted caramel cupcakes out of the oven. "Just a minute," she yelled to the customer out front. When she emerged from the kitchen, she was thrilled to see Trey Donovan himself in her shop. He had a slight limp and a few marks on his face, but those injuries were the only evidence that he had been struck by a car. Taking note of his dark denim, perfect-fitting jeans, and smart polo shirt, she rubbed a hand nervously down her frumpy apron. He grinned at her like she was a slice of freshly baked, lattice-top cherry pie with a dollop of hand-whipped cream on top. "You have a little something right there." He reached out and used the back of his index finger to swipe a stray smear of flour off her cheek. The brush of his skin against hers sent a tingle down her spine, all the way down. "May I?" he asked, indicating the tray of hot cupcakes she had forgotten she was still holding with pot holders. "They're hot," she warned, "and not iced yet." She let her voice trail off because he had already grabbed one and was bouncing it in his hand, trying to keep from getting burned. Grabbing a napkin from the counter, he blew on the piping hot treat and took a tentative bite. "Oh my god!" He made an appreciative, garbled sound as he took another, bigger bite. Somewhat annoyed at his presumptiveness, she tapped her foot. "Those weren't ready," she snapped at him. He seemed totally unperturbed by her snippiness, so she added, "And you're going to have to pay for it. I'm not running a charity here." The look he gave her was priceless. He appeared to be utterly stunned by her abrupt comment. Just when she was wondering if she had gone too far, he tipped his head back and bellowed with laughter. The contagious sound had her smiling, despite her intentions otherwise. "I'll pay for the whole batch. How does that sound?" he offered. "That will be fine," she answered haughtily, not wanting to let him know how tight her money would be because she didn't want to guilt him into paying for his medical bills. He was probably used to having everyone assume he would always pick up the check for everything. That would get so old. "Well, if I'm buying them anyway, I'd like to try the icing, please." Taking his not-so-subtle hint, she took the tray back to the kitchen. "They're still too hot to ice," she informed him as he looked at her expectantly. Is that toffee icing?" At her nod, he stated his approval. "Nice touch," even as he dipped his finger into the bowl to taste it. "Hey!" she reprimanded him. "This batch is mine, remember?" he reminded her, even as a naughty look sparked in his chocolate eyes. "Any ideas of what we could do while we wait for them to cool?" Her back was to the stainless steel counter, and he had moved into her space. He was close, and she could feel the heat emanating from his front. Dipping his finger back into the icing, he held it up to her lips. "Taste it," he suggested. Starting to shake her head, he caught her chin with his icing-free hand. "Taste it, please." As if she would have the power to resist him anything, especially when he requested so nicely. Feeling silly, she flicked her tongue out to slide along his finger. The half-lidded, desirous gaze he gave her made her feel bold, so she took his finger into her warm, wet mouth and sucked. That was all it took. Trey pounced. His mouth was on hers as his tongue replaced his finger, and his arms snaked around her, caging her against the counter. She could feel his firm manhood pressing urgently into her belly. She felt like warm liquid in his embrace as she untucked his shirt and trailed her fingertips up the hot skin of his back. She wanted him more than she dared to admit, even to herself, but some still rational part of her mind knew that this wasn't the time or place. She refused to be one of his conquests that he seduced and forgot about the very next day. Pulling back, she was breathing heavy, but she forced the words out. As soon as she told him to stop, he dropped his hands and backed off. "I'm sorry I let things get carried away," she told him honestly, "but I can't be one of your one-night stands." The look he gave her was more than a little perturbed. She felt relieved that she had put a stop to things if he was going to be this way about it. The last thing she wanted was to get attached to him, only to find out that she was just another notch in his very expensive belt. "You think you know me so well," he said sadly before turning to leave. As an afterthought, he turned and picked up another cupcake. Dipping it directly in the icing bowl, he rationalized the move without looking at her. Just because I'm mad doesn't mean I'm crazy. Then he left, and she stood there in stunned silence. Chapter 9. Ellie spent a long, restless night tossing and turning in her bed. Was she wrong about Trey? Was he not the womanizer that she imagined him to be? He had to be, right? As much as she wanted to be wrong about him, she was scared to allow herself to develop feelings for him. A person with that much money and power would be a bear to live with. She wanted to be her own strong woman, not someone who stood in the shadow of a man who wanted to dominate and control her. He probably thinks all of his money buys him the right to boss everyone around, she decided. I want no part of that, she said aloud to the empty room. Realizing that she sounded like she was trying to convince herself that she didn't want him, she changed tactics. Mumbling to herself, she said, He's probably just never had anyone turn him down before. I pose a challenge, and that's a new thing for him. It's not me he likes, it's the chase. He only wants what he can't have because he normally gets everything he wants. At this point, Ellie realized that her voice had escalated to the point that she was yelling at the empty room. I'm not interested in him, she reminded herself as she stepped into the steamy spray of her shower. I don't want to set myself up for that kind of life. He's probably a workaholic and would ignore me in favor of staying at the office. Then he'd have an affair with his secretary. It's better just to avoid all of that. She leaned her head against the shower wall as she rationalized with herself. Even though all of the things she had just told herself were probably accurate, they didn't change the fact that she wanted to be with him. She wanted it more than she'd ever wanted anything. His money was more of a deterrent than a draw for her. Sure, it would be nice to be comfortable and not have to worry about how to pay the bills every month, but having the kind of money he had would probably become a burden. She didn't want to want him. She shouldn't ache with need for him. It wasn't in her best interest to need him down to her core. She should just forget him and move on, but evidently that wasn't a possibility. It was then that the waterworks started. As the realization set in that Ellie had failed to protect her heart, she sobbed with fear and trepidation over the impending heartache that she felt coming. It seemed unreal that she had fallen so hard and fast for Trey, but she knew she already didn't want to contemplate life without him. The conflicting desires to save herself from being hurt more and to see Trey just one more time dueled in her mind as the hot tears blazed trails down her cheeks. In the end, she decided to make a clean break. It was better for everyone that way. Even as she came to the conclusion that it was better not to see him anymore, her heart shouted at her. Better for whom? Chapter 10. One thing that Ellie prided herself on was being an opinionated, strong-willed woman. After all, how many people decided at the tender age of 8 to open a bakery and then proceeded to follow through on that dream? Once she made up her mind about something, she stuck with it, no matter what. The temptation to break her vow to have a clean break with Trey was almost overwhelming. She tried to convince herself that it would be polite to check in on how he was doing health-wise. She had run over the man with her car, so she really should check, just to be a decent human being. She rationalized that she could check in and be on her merry way, but she knew deep down in her heart that wouldn't be the case. She knew if she saw him again that it would take all of her strength not to pour her heart out to him and beg for any small piece of his life that he was willing to share with her. She refused to give a man that much power over her, especially not one who was used to wielding power over everyone. As much as it pained her, she held true to her decision not to contact him again. That didn't stop her from Googling him, though. She knew from her past stalking adventure of him not to do an image search. She didn't care to see a bevy of beautiful babes hanging on his elbow. That would only serve as a cruel reminder that she would never be enough for such a man. Instead, she decided to look for some dirt on him. What better way could there be to get over a man than to find out some juicy gossip that would ruin the perfect impression he had made on her? She quickly discovered the flaw with her master plan to get over Trey. There wasn't any dirt on him. Every article she found raved about the generous programs he had set up to share his wealth, the scholarships he gave to underprivileged youth, and the donations of both money and time that he made to various charities. The more she searched, the more frustrated she became. Who had ever heard of a sexy, kind-hearted, funny, generous billionaire? Didn't the man have any flaws? He couldn't have gotten to be so wealthy and powerful without being a bit of a jerk, could he? She did finally find a picture of him building a house with Habitat for Humanity where he had a serious case of sweaty hat head, apparently from wearing a hard hat. Wow, talk about grasping at straws. She chastised herself aloud for not being able to come up with any real flaws that Trey exhibited. Slamming her laptop closed in frustration, she decided that he liked sweets a little too much and that he might eventually get a little bit of a pooch around the belly. The fact that he liked to jog popped into her head and shot that one down. Besides, he could probably make a spare tire around the middle look good. The man was absolutely infuriating and sexy. Realizing that she had wasted too much time on the internet already this morning, she grabbed her purple messenger bag to head to work. It was still really dark, so the extra car that was sitting in her driveway made her do a double take. After the initial concern passed that someone might be lurking about and waiting for her, she knew exactly what this was. Beside her beat-up yellow Bug sat a white convertible Mercedes with a giant red bow on it. "He thinks he can buy my affection," she fumed as she drove her ancient car to the bakery. "He clearly doesn't know who he's dealing with." Ellie was surprised when she pulled into the back lot to see that Marcy was already there. Her internet perusal must have taken even longer than she realized because the other woman never got to work before her. The high-pitched trill of Marcy's laughter caught Ellie off guard. When she heard the low, rumbling voice, she knew who must be here without yet seeing him. Sure enough, Trey's lower half was sticking out from under the bakery's industrial-sized stainless steel sink. "The garbage disposal's on the fritz again," Marcy informed her as Ellie stood in the doorway gaping at the scene before her. Marcy had been sitting on the counter with her legs swinging happily, but jumped down quickly when she saw her boss's wide-eyed look. "There must be a cheaper plumber in town," Ellie deadpanned. "Not really." Trey popped his head out to grin at her. "I work for cupcakes. Your cupcakes," he clarified. "Don't you have big international conglomerates to run and take over?" she asked him. "Is that what you think I do?" He and Marcy chuckled like she had just told a great joke. "Well, I don't really know what you do, but I'm fairly certain you don't spend your time fixing garbage disposals, so don't let us keep you from your more important business." He looked taken aback by her abruptness, but he kept his tone light. "Oh, I'm not leaving without my payment, ma'am." He looked impossibly handsome when he leaned in to kiss her cheek before saying, "Besides, what could be more important than making sure everything in your kitchen is in working order?" Whatever it is that you normally do, it's time for you to go back to your regularly scheduled life. You can't hide out here forever." She wasn't sure where that last part came from, but she wondered if it was true. Was he hiding from the pressures of his daily life in her little town? "Oh, and take that car, too. It was a nice gesture, but I can't accept it." "I didn't realize I was bothering you." He looked hurt, but she felt determined not to show any chinks in her armor. She had to make him go before she got to the point where she wouldn't be able to let him go. "I'll go," he said, but he stood there like he was waiting for her to stop him. She nodded, acknowledging that he needed to leave. The downtrodden look on his face nearly melted her heart, but she remained strong as he turned to go. When he turned back to her, she couldn't stop the jolt of hope that surged through her veins. "Can I get some cupcakes for the road?" She hated that disappointment coursed through her with the knowledge that her cupcakes were all he wanted. She blinked back the tears as she stuffed a few of yesterday's raspberry cupcakes with cream cheese frosting into a colorful to-go box. They were probably stale, but it served him right for only caring about her baked goods rather than saying he would miss her. Even though she was staring at the wall, she felt his warmth when he came up behind her. He leaned in close to her ear and revealed, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you ran over me, Ellie Thorne." Depositing a thick, black, gold-embossed business card on the counter in front of her, he said, "Call me any time. I will always be available for you." Then he was gone. Ellie let out the breath that she hadn't realized she was holding and sagged against the counter. She immediately missed his warmth at her back. "Damn, girl!" Marcy chimed in, startling Ellie since she had forgotten the other woman was there. "How can you let that rich hunk of hotness leave? If he looked at me like he just looked at you, I would have mounted him like my own personal stallion and rode him around the bend and back again before I sent him home, if you know what I'm saying." The woman emphasized her crass statement with a sharp elbow jab to Ellie's side. Ellie wasn't exactly sure what she meant, but she got the general idea, and she didn't dare ask for clarification for fear that the other woman might share some details that she didn't want to hear. "He's not right for me," Ellie told her absent-mindedly, since Marcy seemed to be waiting for an explanation. "Well, I'd at least give him a go," Marcy advised, shaking her head as she donned her apron and sauntered to the front of the store to prepare for opening. From the small tastes of him that she'd had, Ellie knew that one go with him wouldn't be nearly enough. She was an all-or-nothing kind of gal, and she felt certain that Trey couldn't give her his all, so she would have to settle for nothing. Opting not to wallow in her sorrow, Ellie threw herself into her work. She probably made far too many batches of everything, but baking took her mind off the burning ball of fire in her chest that was her heart. Chapter 11. The women ended up working late and, surprisingly, had gone through all of the extra batches of brownies, cookies, and soft pretzels, both sea salt and her personal favorite, cinnamon sugar, that Ellie had stress-baked. When Ellie asked why she thought they had been so busy, Marcy confirmed her fears that it had been due to Trey. "Word got around town that he was here, and people were hoping for a glimpse of him, I guess." Marcy shrugged her shoulders. Ellie used the looky-loos as another reason that she was smart to steer clear of any further contact with Trey. "I don't need that kind of constant attention in my life," she muttered to herself as she drove home and fell into bed, utterly exhausted. The alarm seemed to come especially early and jarred her out of a steamy and delicious dream rendezvous with Trey. She normally woke up a few minutes before her alarm sounded, and she rarely remembered her dreams so vividly. Both were a little disconcerting. She found herself being extra cautious on her drive to work. The memory of the icy fear sluicing through her veins when she hit Trey was still fresh in her mind. Her eyes kept wandering to the side of the road, searching for a sexy, jogging billionaire. As much as she knew it was in her best interest not to see him again, she couldn't stop wanting just that. The crowd outside the bakery when she pulled up distracted her from searching for any signs of him. The line of people was wrapped around the building. There were far more customers here waiting on her than had visited her store on its busiest day, and those visits had been spread throughout the day, not waiting for her to arrive. "What in the world?" she wondered aloud as she pulled to the back door, parked in her usual spot, and began the process of opening. Deciding it would be best not to ignore the throng of people outside, she unlocked the front door and tentatively stuck her head out. "It's going to be a while before anything is ready," she warned them. "That's okay," a perky woman towards the front of the line responded. Trey Donovan tweeted that this place had the best cupcakes in the world. He can afford the best of everything, so if they're his favorites, I have to try some. I'll wait all day if I have to. Ellie wondered what these people did for a living that they had the freedom to stand in line in the middle of the night to get cupcakes based on a tweeted recommendation. She felt like rolling her eyes at them, but refrained because this extra boost of business would be a huge help with the impending medical bills that she knew were coming. I'll take a dozen of whatever flavor Trey Donovan likes best, the tall, grungy-looking fellow who was first in line informed her. Oh, what does he like the best? The first woman who had spoken inquired of Ellie. I want to have exactly what he had, she announced dreamily. Ellie had to remove herself from the situation before she decked the woman. She wasn't sure why it bothered her so much to see the glazed-eyed, far-away expression that came over the lady's face when she talked about Trey, but Ellie didn't like it one bit. I'll get things started, Ellie told the crowd at large, which made them clap and whistle like she had just announced that she had found the cure for cancer. Shaking her head and donning her apron, she decided to just dig into her work and not worry about Trey or his tweets. It had been kind of him to mention her shop, so she would do her best to live up to his recommendation. Hours later, she and Marcy were both filthy and exhausted, but they had successfully filled everyone's orders. They were just chiming together 2 mugs of English breakfast tea when a tall and gorgeous, but prim woman in a smart business suit arrived. We're closed, Marcy informed her in a no-nonsense tone. Marcy's curt response to a customer would have normally bothered Ellie, but at this moment she was simply too tired to care. The customer ignored the rude announcement and proceeded to parade around the front of the bakery as if she owned it. The woman dripped classiness, everything from her neatly coiffed blonde chignon to her tailored navy business suit and obviously expensive pumps were understated and elegant. When Ellie caught a whiff of her light floral perfume, she guessed that the woman was from the city. No one in town was so perfectly refined. It wasn't a huge surprise when she dropped a dark, thick business card on the counter that looked remarkably familiar. Millie Parks, she introduced herself to the 2 bedraggled bakery workers. Executive assistant to Mr. Trey Donovan. She said the words haughtily, as if the other women should bow down before her. Ellie disliked her instantly and wondered if Trey had slept with her. How could he not have, she wondered. The woman was a stunner. Trey was a sexy, kind, funny, gorgeous billionaire. The 2 of them would make beautiful babies together. Unsure how her mind had so quickly gone there, and trying to refocus her attention on the woman's words, Ellie asked, I'm sorry, what was that? I said that Mr. Donovan would like to purchase this bakery, she repeated patiently. How much money should I have wired to your account? Ellie was infuriated that he was presumptuous enough to think he could buy whatever he wanted. It's not for sale, Ellie told the other woman firmly, which made Marcy suck in a shocked breath. See how much he'll give you, Marcy whispered the suggestion out the side of her mouth as if the other woman wasn't standing right there, hearing every word. Tell your boss I said no thanks. Ellie handed the card back to the surprised woman and sauntered back to the kitchen. Once there, she let out the breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Of all the nerve, she said aloud as she paced back and forth. He thinks he can buy my bakery, and probably me too while he's at it. She was fuming at his gall. Sending that woman here to throw money at me? Pacing and muttering to herself were only serving to get her more worked up. When Marcy rejoined her in the back, she gave Ellie a look that said, What in the world is wrong with you? Without having to actually say the words aloud. What? Ellie held up her hands, already feeling defensive. You could have named your own price tag and been set for life, she informed Ellie as if she were the densest person alive. This place is my childhood dream. I'm not going to sell it to him. He'd probably tear it down and build a Starbucks or something. You could take the money and open another bakery, an even bigger, better bakery, if you wanted to." Marcy was speaking deliberately slowly as if Ellie were having trouble comprehending English. Beginning to feel petulant, Ellie said stubbornly, "My bakery is not for sale at any price, and I'm going to tell Mr. Moneybags that myself." If she hadn't been in such a huff to storm out, Ellie might have noticed the knowing grin that passed across Marcy's face. Chapter 12. Donovan Enterprises was an even more imposing building than Ellie could have imagined. She shook her head at the enormous steel and mirrored glass skyscraper. The ostentatious structure served as fuel to the flames of her indignation over his showy display of wealth. Seeing the mammoth, phallic reminder of his economic status spurred her on in her quest to set him straight about his attempts to buy her affection. The car she had refused to accept still sat in her driveway as if he believed seeing it again would tempt her into taking it. When her trusty bug had stuttered before starting, she wondered if she should drive the Benz to his office to return it in person. In the end, she had decided not to take it for fear that the purr of the luxurious car's engine would tempt her into accepting his generous offer. She would never be able to live with herself if she let him buy her a car. She wasn't even sure why it would cross his mind to offer it to her. Was he concerned that his body had left a dent in her Beetle? She smiled at the thought as she circled the revolving door into his building. The grin faded when she realized the joke about him denting her car was the kind of funny thing that Trey would say. Would have said, she reminded herself. On the drive into the city, she had convinced herself that the Trey she had glimpsed in her tiny, bustling town could not be the same man who ran this billion-dollar conglomerate. He had even admitted to her that he was generally much more serious than the fun-loving jokester she had gotten to know. He must have been taking a quick reprieve from his usual high-pressure, all-business persona during his brief stay in her town. Now that he was back in his natural habitat, she wondered if she would see even a glimpse of the man she had been feeling definite sparks of attraction, plus something more, for. She felt certain that interacting with Trey the billionaire would obliterate her blossoming feelings for Trey the small-town hospital patient. As the elevator rose at a nosebleed-inducing rate of speed to deliver her to the top floor, she convinced herself that he might not even take the time to see her, despite his promise otherwise. He was a powerful and important man. He couldn't be expected to drop everything just because she stopped by his office. By the time the doors slid open to reveal the opulent reception area on the top level, she was certain that she would immediately be turned away with a polite but firm, "He's busy, but you can make an appointment to see him." That response would give her the perfect excuse to leave and never give the man another thought. Yeah, right. She almost chuckled at her own optimism. The gorgeous surroundings that greeted her when she stepped out of the elevator distracted her from her thoughts. The 3-story wall of water that rained down behind the front desk was nothing short of breathtaking. The office's color palette, a mixture of bright tropical blues and classic muted grays, was stunning. Ellie was only mildly surprised when the woman on the phone at the enormous gleaming mahogany desk turned to smile up at her. Of course, Trey's assistant, Millie, had beat her in getting there, but somehow the other woman looked polished and pristine, despite the traffic-filled, stressful drive into the city. While Millie professionally wrapped up her phone call, Ellie wondered if Trey had provided his assistant with a limousine. Suddenly, Ellie wished that she had taken the time to change her clothes, or at least stop by a restroom to fix her makeup. She wondered if she had flour from the frantic morning's baking on her face, but it was too late to check now. Feeling frumpy when she gazed down at her own jeans and striped t-shirt before her eyes traveled to Millie's sleek, tailored business suit, she wondered, not for the first time, what she was doing there. Hanging up the phone and interrupting Ellie's bout of self-doubt, Millie gave her a welcoming smile. Miss Thorne, it's so lovely to see you again." The statement should have felt false, especially since they had just seen each other, and Ellie hadn't been kind, but it oozed with sincere-sounding warmth. Feeling cynical, Ellie decided that the woman was obviously very good at her job. Expecting to be told that she could make an appointment if she wanted to see Trey, Ellie was surprised when the other woman ushered her directly into his office. "Mr. Donovan is in a meeting, but I'll let him know you're here." Millie smiled at Ellie. "What would you like to drink while you wait?" "Oh, water?" Her answer came out like a question, and she chastised herself about it, while Millie went to retrieve her beverage. In an impossibly short amount of time, Millie returned to the office with a chilled, fancy-looking bottle of water and a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies. "They're probably not nearly as good as what you bake," Millie told her kindly as she set down the silver tray. Ellie shook her head as she looked at the gooey chocolate and marveled at the fact that the other woman had somehow had time to heat up the cookies. She really must be some kind of magical miracle worker. "Mr. Donovan will be with you momentarily," Millie informed her before efficiently swishing towards the door. "Oh, don't interrupt him," Ellie called out to her back. "I can wait," she offered lamely. "He's already on his way." Millie smiled at her before closing the door behind her. "She called her boss, too?" Ellie mumbled in disbelief to the empty office. As she paced back and forth in the massive space, Ellie's nerves kicked into high gear. She had felt so self-righteous on her drive here. How dare he buy her a car and send his assistant to purchase her bakery? Did he think his money could buy him anything? Now that she was here, though, the reality of confronting a powerful business mogul on his own turf was setting in. She was fairly certain that the sweet, light-hearted Trey she knew would become a heartless, cutthroat businessman version of Trey in this environment. Summoning her courage, she paced and fumed. Who does he think he is? Does he think he can buy me? How dare he try to buy my business? That bakery is my baby. Did he think he could wave some dollar bills in front of me and I would sell it? Turning on her heel after this indignant question, she realized that Trey had opened the door and was standing in the entryway to his office. Had he heard her? "Hi," he greeted her enthusiastically, seeming like the small-town version of Trey that she knew and loved. Wait, not loved. Liked immensely. She silently corrected her own thought. Refusing to be distracted by his charming smile or his disarming, innate sexiness, she used the momentum from her angry pacing to fuel her self-righteous rant. Without preamble, she started in. "Just because you're used to getting your way doesn't mean you can come in and throw your money around to buy my bakery." She actually shook her finger at him. The upturned curve of his lips as she blustered only served to make her angrier. "It might be small potatoes to you, but I have put my blood, sweat, and tears into that place, and I'm not about to sell it to anyone, especially not you." The shift in his gaze was subtle, but she saw it. For one brief moment before he covered it, she glimpsed the shrewd and ruthless businessman that she knew he could be. Narrowing his dark gaze at her, he shocked her by responding with a challenging, "Oh, you're going to sell it to me." Chapter 13. "Never!" she practically screeched at him. Deciding that this conversation was going nowhere, she scrabbled for her purse and turned, intending to flounce out of this impossible bastard's office and never return. He grabbed her arm as she brushed past him. "Let me go," she seethed between gritted teeth. "Just hear me out." The imploring gaze in his milk chocolate eyes helped set her somewhat at ease. Deciding that it wouldn't hurt to listen to what he had to say, but still angry, she yanked her arm from his grip. Refusing to sit across from him at his massive, overbearing desk, she opted instead to sit stiffly on the edge of the thick, leather sofa. He joined her there, but left some space between them, evidently sensing her simmering anger. "I fell in love with your town while I was there," he admitted quietly before adding, and I have decided to infuse some money into the local economy for some much-needed improvements." That last bit spiraled her already on-edge nerves over the edge. "You think my bakery requires some much-needed improvements?" She felt hurt and outraged that he had walked into the place that she had poured her heart and soul into for years and found it to be lacking. "No, let me back up." He could tell that she was livid about his insinuation. "I didn't mean your business, although it could use a little influx of cash." When her bright blue eyes bulged out at his statement, he clarified. "Just for some updated, bigger appliances and display cases. You've done a marvelous job with your business with minimal means." Her frantic breath began to return to a somewhat normal pace after his compliment until he added, "It could just use some tweaking." "That's it!" She stood up abruptly. "I don't need to sit here and listen to you insult me, my bakery, or my town. I happen to think that all three are magnificent just the way we are, and, to be honest, it really doesn't matter what you think." Standing up to him felt good, but the way his eyes were sparkling up at her was unnerving. She wished he wasn't so damn handsome. His blatant sexiness made it difficult to stay focused on the topic at hand. What an ass he was. Planning to make a grand exit, Ellie whirled around to leave, but she paused at Trey's desperate call. "Wait!" She turned slowly, but tapped her foot in impatience when he scrubbed a hand over his face. "This is coming out all wrong." His admission was a surprising sign of vulnerability. Her natural tendency was to soften, but she knew it might be a shrewd business maneuver, so she kept her guard up. "I love your town," he revealed. "I love everything about it." He went on to list many of the same things she loved about the quaint locale. The vintage bookstore, the cozy coffee shop, the old-fashioned grocery store with the creaky wooden floors, the tiny hardware store with the jingling bells on the door, the crazy artist studio, and especially the delectable bakery on the corner. She couldn't help but smile at his fond and accurate descriptions of the place she chose to call home. "Then why do you want to come in and change it?" she asked him, honestly perplexed. "Oh, I only want to make it better," he reassured her, making her wonder if their ideas of better would align. "I was thinking that the dilapidated former gas station would make a great ice cream shop, and I'd like to turn the closed bank building into a library." She nodded, imagining his vision of the proposed changes and loving his ideas. "What about the bakery? If you like it, why do you want to change it?" she asked him, nervous about his answer but needing to know. She couldn't imagine him adding a Starbucks to his project list for town improvements, but why did he want to buy it? "I was buying it for you," he admitted. Confused, she said, "I already own it." "The bank owns it," he corrected her. "All of your profits go towards paying the bills each month. I'm amazed you have enough left over to live on." Her cheeks flamed with embarrassment that he had figured out her financial predicament. "It might seem impossible to you," she waved her hands around, indicating their surroundings, "but it can be very hard to make money." "I know that, and you're doing an amazing job with it." He sounded so understanding and sincere that she had to fight to keep the tears at bay. "All I wanted to do was inject a little cash into the business to make things easier for you. I'll remain a silent business partner if that is what you want." "No," she shook her head adamantly. "The bakery is mine, and I'm not selling it, not any of it, to anyone." "Okay," he nodded, seeming to finally accept her answer. Changing tactics, he asked, "Would you consider hiring me? It seems that I am in need of a job." Chapter 14. "Hiring you?" she spluttered. "One thing you definitely don't need is a barely above minimum wage job." "Actually, that is exactly what the doctor ordered. That is who I was with when you got here." Turning her head to the side, she asked, Your doctor comes to you?" He nodded as if that were the most normal thing in the world. "I went into her office for some tests, but yes, she comes to talk to me about the results." "Wow, I think we really are from two completely different worlds," Ellie mumbled, shaking her head at the idea. Trey would be appalled by the 2-hour wait for a 3-minute visit whenever she went to see her doctor. Turning the conversation back to the point he had been trying to make, Trey said, "She told me that you hitting me with your car was probably the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." He paused and grinned up at her facial expression, which was utter disbelief. "I couldn't argue with her about that because it did allow me to meet you, but she didn't know that part yet." Ellie felt squirmy at his use of the word yet. Had he talked to his doctor about her? "Anyway," he went on, "she said my body is under too much stress. I have the heart of a man twice my age, and if I don't make some immediate changes, I won't live another 10 years. Ellie's mouth fell open at his sobering statement. She plopped back down on the couch beside him in shocked disbelief. "Well, what are you going to do?" she finally asked him. "It's not like you can just quit. There are hundreds, probably thousands of people that work for you and are counting on you." "True," he confirmed. "My little brother has been nipping at my heels for years wanting to take on more responsibility. I think he might get it sooner than he expected. He's the next in line to take over if something happens to me anyway. He might as well be prepared," he added practically, shrugging his shoulders. "You are going to give it all up just like that?" she asked, snapping her fingers and not quite believing it could be possible. "It's either that or die trying to hold on to it all." The grim reality seemed to have already sunk in with him. His easy release of it all seemed too good to be true. "You'll maintain control of the company and just let your brother handle the day-to-day decisions, right?" she guessed. He only pondered the question for a moment before answering. "I think I'll give it a year and see how it goes. I found this great little town with the most divine bakery that I'd like to stay in for a while, if it's okay with you." He looked deep in her eyes to gauge her reaction to his question. "That would be fine." She looked down, grinning to herself at her calm answer despite her fluttering heart. "Fine?" He pretended to be outraged, even as he took her hands within his own. "I think you mean splendid or magnificent or—" He seemed to be searching for another word, so she filled it in for him. "Perfect." She was surprised to see the look of relief on his face, but it was quickly replaced with one of concern. "You won't be disappointed that I don't have all of this power?" He waited with bated breath for her response. When she did answer, it blew him away. "I like you better without all of this." She used her arms to indicate their surroundings. "I've never known anyone like you," he revealed. "Most people are enthralled by the money and power, not turned off by it. It's refreshing and charming that you truly don't care about it." He leaned in to kiss her on the cheek, which made it flush a gorgeous shade of hot pink. "So, I didn't break you with my car?" She asked one of the questions that had been burning deep in her belly since the accident. "I was already broken," he answered near her ear before adding, "You saved me." Relief flooded her system at hearing him say the words. She turned and pressed her lips to his cheek. Unable to ignore the other question that had been near the top of her mind since she had seen the extravagant flower arrangement in his hospital room, she decided to just ask him directly. "Who is Selena?" "No one that you need to worry about," he assured her before adding, "You are the only one for me." "I want you." Her whispered words were filled with the promise of delightful things to come. The noise he made deep in his throat should have frightened her, but instead it made her feel bold. Trailing light kisses along his jawline, she made her way as close to his mouth as she could without making direct contact. Both of them were breathing heavily, their lips fractions of an inch apart. "Are you ready to practice not being in charge?" Her voice sounded husky as she hovered very near him. Oh, yes, he answered enthusiastically, and her mouth closed over his. Will Trey's brother Trevor be able to fill Trey's very expensive shoes? Find out in The Billionaire's Brother.